Building something useful for the world is the ultimate experience of learning. It puts you in front of questions and dilemmas, insights.
On your LinkedIn, it says kindness is your strategy.
You can move fast and break things and be a kind person as well. Kindness does not necessarily mean that you're nice all the time, right?
Let's say, someone watches one YouTube video and he decides one day, I want to start a startup. Where should someone like that start?
Actual experience of building will help you get that clarity. The second thing is to develop your personal networks. And the last thing is read a lot and write a lot.
I am curious because, nowadays on X, a lot of the time I'll see, when I'm studying or when I'm seeing like the culture of Silicon Valley, of startups, it seems like the culture is very much built around build and break things and move and, don't care about people's feelings. It doesn't matter. It's about getting the job done. Whereas your approach, from what you've said, is very different. It's getting to know the people you're leading in a much more personal way. I think on your LinkedIn, it says kindness is your strategy, is your edge. I am curious about that clash of ways people are presenting it. You're very familiar with this world. And yet I see a lot of people who are like, okay, I'm just going to work 16 hours a day. I don't care how people feel. I'd love to get your thoughts on that and how kindness can be the edge, be the strategy that drives innovation forward.
Yeah. I mean, you can move fast and break things and be a kind person as well. Kindness does not necessarily mean that you're nice all the time, right? So kindness, for example, when I mentor founders and with team members, being kind is being honest, giving true feedback, right? So the worst thing that, for example, that I can do working with founders is just telling them what they want to hear, right? Because it won't help them progress. It won't help them learn, right? But you can do it in a very productive and I think respectful way. I think that the problem is that people think that if you are very aggressive and show no respect or no kindness and you move fast and you break things and that's, in my view, that's very good for short term, right? For the long term, you're building relationships for the long term, right? So a lot of the things that I've done is adding value first to people, right? Getting to know them, building the relationships, and then in a very non-linear and unexpected way, 5 or 10 years later, you get the results, you get the profits out of it in ways that you wouldn't imagine. And you need to be very, very resilient. And you need to have a lot of conviction in that. I think that's strategy and that's ways of thinking and way of life. If you compare the early days like a military environment, you move fast and you break things all the time, right? No matter how things are run at X and things are run in Silicon Valley, these are very stressful situations that you need to just make it work. And it's very similar to the startup environment and the startup journey, I think. And this is why you see a lot of good founders coming from the Israeli ecosystem. I think that you adapt to the change. There is nothing that will break you. Just move on and move on. But still, there is something about caring about one another. When one is falling, you pick them up and you go and run with them. There's all those videos from marathon runners, that are, if there's another marathon runner and they know it, they're going and pick them up and run with them. This is I think the visualization of how I see things, right? If you're going to pick up people and you're going to help them run with you, you're going to get far, right? If you see only the end line and you're going to run away and the guys or the girls behind you are going to fall and you don't care, next time that you will fall, they would not care as well, right? See, I believe that you can do great things together with people, and it's all based on trust, and it's all based on, helping one another and adding value to other people as well.
100%. And I think that the thing you mentioned of, in the short term versus the long term, that's a real thing. And I think especially for young people, it's very hard to see that long term because we haven't really worked. A lot of people can't even see till next year, let alone 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I want to talk more about, after your time at the IDF. So you finished your time there, and then you joined Midingo and you worked there while also being a student at Tel Aviv University. I want to hear more about that experience, working at a startup and at the same time studying. And is that something you recommend for students nowadays? And I'd just love to hear about it.
Yeah. So I had very, very different plans, and maybe nothing that I've planned in my life happened, right? So, and this is my main learning about life is that life is a series of opportunities that you might not see or not plan for. So I really wanted to study at MIT, for example, and I applied once, I applied twice, I was on the wait list, and then I did not get accepted, right? And then I went to learn at Tel Aviv University, which was a really very good choice. But before I did that, I started working in a startup, and I didn't plan to go and work at a startup. I came back from a trip in South America that I planned for 3 months, and then I ended up staying almost a year there. So I came back. I really wanted to do something that will be, I had a specific restaurant that I wanted to work in. And then I got an opportunity to come and help with the deck of a startup. I just did that. And it was in the north of the country, and I was in Tel Aviv. And I took it, and I started part-time, and then they got more and more things to do. They developed a new patent IP team, and I took more and more responsibility, and then I went full-time. And I worked there, I think, for 2 or 3 years, and then I decided to go and study. And then I started my undergrad while working. So I did full-time engineering study at Tel Aviv University while working in a startup. And this experience, one, made me know what I want to learn because I was exposed to many types of engineering, right? So instead of just going and say, oh, I want to be an electrical engineer, which is what I planned, I was exposed to mechanical engineering, and I was exposed to biomedical engineering. And I was really inspired by mechanical engineering as the most basic and traditional aspect of engineering that includes many other types of engineering. And I thought this would give me the base. So the work helped me understand what I want to do. And the other thing is that it also helped me directly with my work. So even my final project at the university was a product that we even had a patent for at work. And I had my mentors at work, was the VP of R&D, and I was very close to the co-founder and CEO. So I got to experience the entire life cycle of a startup, but also what is the role of an engineer. And one of the things that I've learned is that most of the students that were with me that did not work ended up in the 4th year without any clue of what an engineer is doing at work, right? So you do 4 years of engineering, and then you have no idea what an engineer is doing, and there are many types of engineering jobs. So for me, one of the things that I push a lot of students that come to me is go to work, right? Go experience the real experience of working with other engineers, with other people, with product people, or marketing people, build a project or build a startup while you're a student, and you can do both, right? And one complements each other. If you're doing it right, and if you're very excited and motivated, it also helps to your degree as well.
100%. From the people I've met at university who are doing things on the side, building things, you can really see that their understanding, not just of the thing they're building, but of the world is so much stronger than everyone else because they have some skin in the game and they're in positions where they have to learn all these different things. I have one friend, and he's working at a commodities trading firm while studying maths and CS on the side. I speak to him and I'm blown away by his insights at times about the industry, about the way the financial system works. And I 100% agree with you that working on the side really gives you a bigger picture for how the world works.
And I would say that building something useful for the world is the ultimate experience of learning, right? So the reason that it puts you in front of questions and dilemmas and insights. So if you're building something, for example, let's say you're a CS major and you're building a simple application, I don't know, something that will help people manage their time. Just for example, with productivity app. It engages you with the market of other competitors. It engages you with customers. It engages you with the financial aspect of building a business, maybe some legal aspects. There's so many aspects of building something that people use. And if you go back and you're bringing that knowledge and experience into your CS, maybe business studies, you can ask a lot of questions that will help you dive deeper into the theoretical aspect also, and also the research aspect, right? So I think they're great complementary activities.
Let's say you're speaking to a university student, and I would imagine that the university students you normally speak to are the driven kind, because they're the ones who want to build things. They're the ones who wants to start things. But let's say you're speaking to someone and he has no idea what he wants to do. He knows he wants to build something. And I can see this as a case for a lot of my friends, because we're so bombarded, doom scrolling on social media and whatnot. A lot of people don't have real interests, don't have real things they're passionate about, don't have real problems that they want to solve. And so let's say, someone watches one YouTube video and he decides one day, I want to start a startup, right? Where would you advise him to start? Because it seems like so many people are building things. The landscape is so competitive. It feels like if you build for example, an AI wrapper, which a lot of people are building, that, the big guys can easily just kill it by moving that functionality into, let's say, just the ChatGPT interface in OpenAI's case. Where should someone like that start? No passions, just wants to build.
All people, I think, have passions, and I think all people have some dreams and aspirations. I think in many cases, it's people are either lost, they're either confused, they're not clear. So clarity is something that's extremely important, and it takes time. It takes time and effort to get that clarity of what you want to do. And that maybe the first thing that I would tell them is that you don't need to decide. Life is full of surprises, and many students, I think of that decision as the final decision that they'll have to make, and this will be their career for 20 years. And it's not like that, right? Some people have, that I know in many corporations have spent 20, 30 years in the same company, and they do a lot of different roles inside a large company. It might happen, right? The decision that you make to, for example, go and study philosophy doesn't mean that you're going to be a philosopher or be in academia, right? I know a lot of people in tech, in investment, that studied chemistry or studied biology or, and they're amazing, right? Because they took that, what you learn in your undergrad or master's degree helps you get that clarity of what you want to experiment. And I think life is a set of experiments that you learn from each other, and you can move knowledge and experiences from one another. Then what I would really advise students to do is 3 things. One is to look for a problem that they want to solve and start building for that problem, right? So, and it might be your problem. It might be something that you're exposed in your ecosystem and in your community. I would aim for students to think of large global challenges like climate change and financial independence and equality and things that are really, really big, and work backwards to find things that they can start building to solve those problems. The actual experience of building will help you get that clarity. The second thing is to develop your personal networks. So speak with a lot of people, create new connections, expand your network. As you speak with more and more people, you will understand better in a clear way what you want to do and what are the decisions that you want to make, if you want to stop what you're doing, if you want to pivot. And the last thing is read a lot and write a lot, right? I find that reading books has shaped who I am and my decisions and my ability to see clearer. And then writing helps me digest and to put what I think and the dilemmas that I have and the thoughts that I have into the world, and also get feedback. These are the three things that I would really highly recommend. Build something to solve a big problem, grow your network, and read and write a lot.
Writing is something I haven't actually heard before. I've heard a lot of people say, recommend reading, but you're the first actually person that I've spoken to that's recommended writing. Is there something about writing that you think, separates it from, let's say, someone who reads and just talks about the ideas with friends? I would love to hear more about that. Why specifically writing? Is it the clarity that comes with that clear thinking? Love to hear more.
Yeah. It's interesting that not a lot of people are pushing for writing, especially a lot of people that come from, from in tech, like engineering background. It's very difficult for them to write, right? To write English or write, whatever language they use. What's the magic about generative AI? It can generate structured thinking. If you think about the same system that is just reading, just digesting things on the back end, you're unable to complete the loop of thinking, of seeing an output, giving it feedback. It's the same mechanism in writing for me. I write a lot. I write posts on LinkedIn. I write articles, essays. The actual writing helps me think, helps me reflect on the things that I read as well. I inject things that I read, my thoughts. It helps me shape my worldview, but it also a tangible thing that I can just send to the world, and people are reading it and they can connect. So the actual experience of writing helps me get more clarity, gets me to reflect on things. You want to learn more about AI, you learn about venture, you want to learn about biology, write about it, right? Open a blog, post on LinkedIn, post on wherever. It doesn't really matter, right? But the actual experience of writing is helping you structure your thoughts, creating your worldviews. And I think it's not just a one time, right? So it's a skill. And what people are doing typically is that they write one thing and then they leave. So for me, I write every day, every day I write. So, and you can do this, you can write a diary, for example, right? The same thing. But that's an active engagement that you do with yourself, and I highly recommend it.
Would you say that active engagement, would you say that in your personal life, it's helped you to come up with some incredible career insights, personal insights? I remember being in high school and actually thinking about it now, I remember hearing the advice of writing. I think it was maybe Naval Ravikant or Tim Ferriss. It was one of those two. And I think they said similar things to what you said, which is it provides structure to your thinking. But for me, what ultimately stood out is I felt like it was, at the end of the day, a means to reflect on stimulus that you've been provided. So everything you've learned is a means to then synthesize it. Could you not say the same thing about having to articulate that? So everything you read about, just talk about it with your friends, your mentors, or family. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, why writing specifically?
So is the question like comparing it with speaking with your friends about a
Yeah,
topic?
yeah.
It's a good question. I think it's not an or question, but it's an and question. So you can definitely, you can brainstorm, you can discuss things with your friends. There is, I truly believe that there is something about converting thoughts into tangible visual modes. Like, and I'll give you an example, right? The number of people that come to me with, I have an idea for a startup is insane, right? Everybody that I know has an idea for a startup. I'm not talking about building. I was on a panel this Friday with LBS, with a program at LBS, and I talked with another investors, and we said there are founders that just build, right? There are founders that build decks and founders that build products, but there is another step on the way. If you have an idea and you put it on paper, right? Either as a sketch or as wireframes or as blurb, some kind of a text. That's the next step of turning your ideas into something tangible, right? And then you get that thing on the paper. It's the next step is to start building an MVP. And the next step is to bring on people that will help you. So I think that conversion of idea of, things that are intangible, that in our heads or in our conversation into something that is fixed on a paper, right? That is another step into building something useful, right? I don't think that taking an idea will just become something without that step, because I think this is how life is working in incremental steps, that you do small steps. And I think writing, sketching, those are things that help you take your thoughts, your ideas, your discussions with friends and co-founders.
I see. One of the other things you mentioned was building the network. And this is like your advice for young people. And when you were talking about that, you said, try to provide value to someone. What value can, let's say I'm a college student and I want to meet someone who's big in the venture space or who's founded a successful startup, and I just want to be friends just so I can learn. How do you go about meeting these people? How do you go about building that network when you feel like you don't really have a value add? I'm just a university student. I don't actually have anything to offer this person who's very successful. How do you go about meeting these people and building a friendship when there's not really much of a value add that a university student can give to these successful individuals?
Yeah. So the first thing that I will tell you is that you always have a value add, right? It doesn't matter if you're in university, if you're working at Microsoft, or if you're I don't know, you always have something to offer people, if it's perspective, if it's experience, if it's your time. It doesn't matter if you are not an expert in a field, you always can find something valuable that you can provide. But I think before that, being curious about other people and what they're thinking, that's the ultimate hook for connection, right? So as university students, you will meet a lot of people on campus and different communities and projects. The ability to reach out to people that you don't know out of your circle is one of the most important skills that anyone can have. For founders, for people in corporates. A lot of people in corporates, for example, are building their internal network very well. The ones that are progressing to become CEOs of corporates are also building their external. They're building relationships with other people in other corporates, with partners, with investors. They are the ones that have another perspective on building their own ecosystem. But also for founders and for students, right? So if you're able as a student to reach out to other students in other universities, or to professors in other universities, or to people in that is an amazing skill to have, and you should just do it as a habit. Just reach out to other people. You have the platforms today like LinkedIn and like Facebook and other things. But then most of the people that are doing this are asking for something. So they just go and do, hey, I want to connect. I want to show you, for example, a lot of founders are asking for money, right? Asking for investment. But I've never asked me a single question, right? Never. So the first step that you can offer someone is curiosity about them. So going and seeing what they're writing, what they're doing. Just be curious about their lives, about their thoughts, about their worldview. After you do that, the path for that person to engage in a meaningful relationship with you is very high. There are people, for example, that I don't know, and they engage with my content. And then they reach out after they engage with my content, and I'm hopping on a call with them. I might introduce them to investors, to other people that I know, because they were curious about what I'm writing. And I saw who they are through their responses. But if someone that I've never knew him, he sends me a connections request with a request for, we're raising 500K or $1 million. I don't know you. If it's an amazing business that I'm curious about, that's cool. But usually the probability that I will answer this or that I'll hop on a call is lower because they haven't done the effort really to be curious about what I'm focused on and other aspects of my work. So maybe the value add is to be curious, is your curiosity in other people.
I think that insight's gold, and genuinely thank you very much. Because, yeah, I think a lot of young people, and myself included, there are times where I don't really know how I can meet this person. And now that I'm starting this podcast, I guess there is a more clear like value add in my mind. And even when I am curious, it's like, okay, well, I'll give you maybe some content that you can post on your LinkedIn or your YouTube. And then maybe, even though the platform is very small, maybe it'll grow and you'll get a bit more engagement. And so from my end, that's a bit clearer. But I think for a lot of young people, the value add is it can be very unclear, and it's a bit daunting to reach out to these people and hope to build a friendship. But I think what you mentioned with curiosity is a big thing. And I'd like to learn more about how people have reached out to you and been curious. Like, have there been people who've reached out to you, genuinely curious about the things you do, engaging with the content on LinkedIn, and have those relationships grown into real friendships where they're able to ask you for, like, things, text you, and then vice versa? Maybe you want some insight about something they're building, and maybe it's a certain problem they're trying to solve that'll help you advise someone else. Like, has that relationship developed beyond the initial coffee chat?
Yeah, I think that, people reach out to me and I reach a new person every day, right? So, and I can't say that, it's always deep as you would like, because when you do it in high quantity, sometimes, you connect with someone and then after 2 years, there's something that comes up, so I can't say that everyone that I connect with, I invest a lot of time in engaging with their content, but I am at least exposed to what they're thinking. I think there are many occasions of people that connected with me and, they saw me, for example, in an event, and then they reached out to me personally and say, hey, we saw what you wrote about this and that. It helped us close a round, right? And they did not engage. They did not write me anything, but just the fact that, they were engaged on the back end, it helped them in some ways. I had one time that it helped someone to get their CTO, for example. So again, it is a long-term game as well. And sometimes you don't know the direct impact of it. So it's very difficult to quantify it, right? If people are looking for quantifiable justification for doing this, they will need to wait for 10, 20 years. But it's definitely sometimes comes from unexpected ways and platforms that this impact comes.
Oh, wonderful. So we've talked a bit about, relationship building, and I guess I want to hear more about your career. So you were an entrepreneur in residence at BP, and then you also worked at Siemens Energy as a venture partner. Talk to me about those two experiences. I guess they're a bit different in nature, but both at energy companies. And what were the experiences like? What problems did you have to solve, and ultimately, what did you learn from those two work experiences?
Yeah, so they were actually very similar, but also very different, right? Both BP and Siemens Energy are large energy companies, I think around 1 million employees, global organizations. In both companies, I came in as someone who is not a traditional corporate person, right? So I came with a lot of new ideas, and the idea is to build the venturing units of those companies. At BP, for example, I came and we built a new independent organization called Launchpad that invested in startups. But we also did incubation, and we helped with coaching CEOs on the ventures portfolio. We did spin outs as well, so creating companies from 0 to 1. At Siemens Energy, it was a part of the corporate structure, right? So inside of this strategy and innovation, but mainly it was the same experience of working with the corporate to build a new operating model, to build a new CVC, to invest in startups. So in both of them, it was about bridging the large corporations of the world and the startups and also the VC ecosystem. I think that many people see companies and corporates as, you know, they have a really big gap in terms of the language. And I think one of the things that I've done there is to bridge that gap, right? To help the corporates speak the startup language and to help the startups speak the corporate language, which I do a lot more today outside of those large corporations. But it also was to work internally with executives to help them understand the value of startups, to help them understand what is the risk profile of investing in startups, right? So corporates are thinking in a quarter to quarter mindset, right? They need to report on corporate revenues, and startups, they just don't operate. It could take like 5 to 7 years until you see revenue, and even not, right? In a way, venture is the business of losing money rather than earning money, and it's a home run game. So, and it's a very difficult notion, I think, for corporates to understand, but the ones that understand that are really creating an innovation culture. The other thing is to work internally with corporate people that want to build a new venture internally. And that includes a whole set of challenges that external founders don't understand, right? So building venture inside a corporate is challenging. Building a venture outside of corporate is challenging, but those are very different challenges that those founders need to face.
What are some of the different challenges between, within a huge corporation building an arm or, maybe like an in-house startup versus building it on your own? I guess on one hand, you have access to a whole lot more capital, but maybe things move more slowly. And on the other hand, the opposite. But I'd love to hear from you. What are some more specific stuff that you experienced in those two different worlds?
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, outside, so for example, a startup, you want to build a startup, you're free to do whatever you want, right? You just build stuff, you launch stuff. There's no politics involved, no legal issues, no reputation or anything, right? You just do it. On the other hand, you don't have a lot of resources. You need to build those resources. You need to raise capital, bring on board people. So it's really an experience of you have total freedom to do whatever you want, but you have nothing to start with. So you're starting from scratch. In large organizations, that's a little bit different because people usually have jobs and they do it on the side, right? They're joining a program. Maybe they get 3 or 6 months to do this. They might not go back to their job, or they're doing that job plus that venture, but they're building it in boundaries. So they don't have the freedom that you have, right? So they need to get a champion internally. They need to prove themselves. They might have the resources that you don't have, but those resources come with a cost, right? It might be, I'll give an example, right? That we've built this authentication system internally, right? Usually you would do something scrappy on AWS, you just launch it, people can log in with Google or Facebook, whatever it is, internally, right? You can't do it, right? Because you have a cybersecurity team, for example, that will say, hey, you need to do a pen test with IBM that costs $50K, right? And that takes 3 months. So there are different friction points and different limitations that exist in the corporate world, right? Even on brand reputation. So if you want to launch a new startup and you want to call it, I don't know, whatever name, right? That needs to go through PR sometimes, right? That's a long process. They need to approve it. They might not approve it. So you don't have the freedom that you would have, but you might have resources, but they might not be the right resources, right? So these are very, very different situations. They're both challenging, but they're both exciting in the same way. I think the interesting thing is to bridge those two worlds. So I think corporate people can bring a lot of things to startup ecosystem. Startups can bring a lot of things to the corporate ecosystem, but it's sometimes like being in a room where one person is speaking, for example, Portuguese, and the other person is speaking French, and they both don't know the other language, and they keep on speaking, right? So they need to learn to slow down a little bit, to learn how each other operate, how each other speak in very simple manners.
I feel like in the culture of Silicon Valley and just in startups in general, there's this disdain for corporate culture and that it's people move slow. There's a lot of bureaucracy. And in fact, I was listening to Nick Storonsky, founder of Revolut, and he was saying that he never liked hiring or never really, I mean, now a bit more, but never really liked hiring people who'd worked traditionally in the financial system when hiring for Revolut. But you've said that, there's things that people have to offer. I'd love to hear more specific. What things do you think those are? And, in the case of a startup founder, when should they hire someone from the corporate world? And when should they just hire someone who's super smart, willing to break things? Which I'm not saying people in the corporate world are not, but obviously there's the experience of working in a bigger organization. That it definitely influences the way you think about things.
I wrote about it, I think, like a week or two ago. I have this principle that I call, at the early stage, focus on heart counts and not on head counts, right? At the beginning of the ride, and I think also later on, you need to focus on hiring people that will be in the highs and lows and are extremely adaptive and curious to learn whatever they need to learn in order to execute whatever they need to execute. Those could be 25-year-old people, and they could be also 50-year-old people from a corporate, right? So I think that there's a difference between engaging with a corporate as an organization, and let's be honest, like OpenAI is engaging with Microsoft and getting a lot of leverage for that, right? So move fast, break things. It's true, there are corporates that are slower, faster, but startups that are scaling are engaging in with corporates, no matter if they like it or not. It's part of their growth strategies, and most of them are, right? But at the beginning of that journey, the set of skills that you need are not fixed. So what I recommend people to do is to understand, if they're hiring, don't hire a corporate executive, especially if you don't have the capital to do that, right? So you can hire like a big name, but find out if they are a heart count or a head count, right? If they're a heart count, it means that they fit to the culture. They will stay even if things will get low, and they will be able to do things that are beyond what they have learned and know, right? So for example, if you need to execute a project and the executive comes and said, okay, I'll need a contract with a third party and it will cost us, I don't know, 10 million. And you raise 2 million. This was the example that Jack Ma in the post that I wrote gave, right? And they would not find any other way to do it. That's not the person for you. But if they know and they bring all that experience and will say, okay, I've learned this. I know this guy from this corporate from 10 years ago. I'll use my personal connections. I'll bring them on board. We'll start here. That could be a corporate person with the right adaptive mindset that will be a heart count, that will be a fit to you, right? So I think I don't like the notion that if, we don't like to hire people from corporates. Corporates have millions of people, and they're very, very different. And there are people that are with a fixed mindset, people that are innovative, that got stuck because of different things, because they have families and kids and they didn't want to take the risk. Learn the person, learn if they're a heart count or a head count. It's about the people that you hire with the right mindset, and also how you empower them to do things and push them further. Yeah, I think this is where I stand on this.
And I don't think it's fair to just say that people in big corporations move slow, because, there's a reason why these huge tech companies are where they are today. It wasn't by moving slow all the time. Throughout this conversation, you've talked a lot about solving problems, and that's really the main thing. When you're building startups, you need to solve problems. And I think an underlying theme in what you do is that you're very mission driven. You kind of is your strategy. And I want to hear more about, you're a father of 3. What do you want for your kids? You've been very successful in startups. How do you raise your kids to tackle these problems? And I guess one of the questions, and this is something I am curious about, when I speak to successful people, how do they raise their kids? What do they want for their kids? And ultimately, like, with what they want, how do they help their kids get there?
It's a really good question. So I'm learning as well. Like, I think I have 3 boys, very energetic ones. They're very decisive. And I think raising them is one of the most challenging and exciting leadership experiences that I have, right? So if anyone wants a leadership course, they are invited to my house. Especially, I have a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. They all have very, very strong characters. I think for me, what I like is that they are explorers, right? And sometimes they explore stuff just for the sake of exploring things, and they call themselves explorers, right? So they're actively saying to me, we're exploring this, we're exploring that. And I think the notion of exploration is getting missed sometimes as we grow older, right? Because we're shaped to do things that we think we need to do, and we stop exploring. The other thing is that we use a lot of play, right? I find as a grown-up that I sit down and when we need just to play, with cars and things like that, it's a skill that we miss as well, right? So just sitting down, imagining things. My kids are very, very creative. They're imagining a lot of things. Like they're saying, for example, we sat down and my son said, "Do you see the dragon over there?" Now, it's a real thing because he builds a story. It creates a whole world for Ari, for Oluran. And I really like that. And I want to maintain that. On the other hand, I think that there are some skills that they need to learn. So I'm less concerned about if they would be excellent in math, right? I'm more concerned about them being kind to people, respectful to people, curious about things, being able to learn. And I think that the biggest challenge is to make them resilient to failure, which is something that we're constantly engaging with, like, about feedback, about friendships, about things that they go through at schools and nurseries. But you can see that we develop that lack of resilience. That I think this is the role of parents. Like when my 2-year-old falls down and he just get up, right? So the question is, how do we react as parents when they fall and start crying? If we react dramatically, they will cry even more. They would go all in that experience. But if we're just going to say, "Hey, nice fall, high five," they will give you a high five and they will stand up, right? But they got a feedback, like, "Nice fall." So even the failure was a good experience. We saw how you failed, but it was good. Now let's try again, right? Yeah. So these are the things. But again, it's very much like building a startup because there are always different scenarios that we don't even expect for them as individuals, but also the dynamics between them and their environment.
Oh, 100%. And actually, one of the things that you said was they're explorers and they're very curious people. And so you allow them to kind of explore that. And I think one of the things underlying what you said, or at least in my mind, underlying what you said, is you want them to have agency, that they themselves are curious about things. They themselves explore things. Today, I think being a parent is especially challenging, especially because of all these tech companies. I have 7 siblings. I'm the second eldest of 7. I watch over my siblings. And one of the things that I really struggle to get them to do is put the phone down. And like, especially for really young kids, that they are to explore, they are to be creative. But I think all the short form content, especially, it dulls them and their attention spans, especially watching that content at such a young age. I truly think it destroys their attention spans. And so I am curious on your end, you're very heavily in tech. How do you build an environment for them to be curious, to explore, but at the same time, not be shackled by maybe being like scrolling too much, being too curious about all this different short form content, and realize, and at the end of the day, if they're scrolling all day, it's a pipeline of information you can't really control going into their heads, rather than they themselves being the ones to explore the world. I'd love to hear more about your mindset when it comes to these things.
I think the world is changing and education is changing and parenting is changing. And I don't think we have enough frameworks and skills, especially on parenting, right? If you think about all the things that you like at workplace, all the trainings, you don't have that for the most important job that people have. I am spending a lot of time on my phone. And what I'm happy about is that sometimes my kids give me feedback and saying, hey, daddy, put your phone down. I'm saying, you're right. I'm going to put it down. Right. So first of all, it's showing them that I acknowledge that. The second thing is that I try in many cases just to put my phone in charge and then to be with them, to be present with them. And I think the experience is very, very different, right? So they could sense if you're with your phone, you're not with them, really, right? And vice versa. I think what we see around content is extremely difficult. Even YouTube Kids. So, right, the YouTube Kids is full of things that you don't want to show your kids, right? Even though it is labeled as YouTube Kids. So we today we chose a few things. We limited the time of their TV. We're focused more on funneling their time into play and to reading. But obviously we can't close them into this world that they are born into about content. And I'm creating a lot of content as well, right? But it has to have value, right? So what we see that there is different types of content that you can expose your kids to. One is valuable content with valuable information. And the other one that is just attention hook, right? Of just, things because in the end, what kids are doing, they're imitating, right? So you could see that kids that are seeing something on YouTube or on a TikTok, they will go and imitate the same thing, right? They will react exactly the same. And also it's with our behavior with adults, right? So they will see how we behave. And I think going back to leadership, right, by example, I think that is the most important thing. So what I like to do is I like them seeing me holding a book and reading. I like them seeing me going for a run or have a conversation with them rather than just scrolling over the phone. And so it's an exercise for us as well than for them.
Thank you very much for that. I think those are some things I'm going to take. I mean, I'm not a dad, I'm 20 years old, but with my younger siblings, I think that's something that I can improve on, just being present with them and making the effort to put my phone down. I think that's an excellent place to leave it. You shared some incredible insights about your professional journey, how nothing you planned ever turned out the way you planned it to turn out, startup, venture capital, and then also just how you raise your kids, especially in this unbelievably challenging world. So thank you very much, Illai. All the best.
With pleasure. Thank you.